Hi and welcome to another YouTube video for Programming 2. If you're in the lab already, you can start by going to Eclipse and creating a new Java project, just like you did last week, lab2. And what we're going to look at today is some examples of creating our own Java classes. And we do so by choosing the sorts of data that we want to store in our objects. So we're going to look at three key points: is how to define the class and how to use the class, initialize it, and how to store data in our objects that we initialize from the class. So let's get started. The example we give in the lab is a book class. So let's start right away by defining a new Java class called book and finish. So here we are, the very basic default book class. Now what do we want to store in a book? Well, there's lots of things we might want to talk about when we talk about books, but we could keep it quite simple. We might have the title of the book, and we might have the author of the book, and maybe the number of pages we want to store that the book is consisting of. So what do we do? Well, how do we store a name? That's pretty easy. String, call it author name, like that. Maybe here string title. It doesn't matter the order that you put these in. And maybe int n pages. So that's number of pages, let's say. So that is our basic book class. Now remember I said in the lecture that the class is more like a schematic rather than an actual object. So this is just describing what a book object would look like. So how do we initialize it? Well, let's create a new class. We're going to call it book application. We're just going to make a software application, and we're going to have a public static void main method, but I don't want to type all that, so I'm just going to click down here, and you'll notice that I get all of that for free. That's a little pro tip for you people that are actually watching these videos, save you a bit of time. So how do we create a new book? Well, we use the new keyword. Remember that? Book, a book is equal to a new book. Now I'm doing two things at once here. The first thing is I'm declaring a variable like that. So that's fine. That says that I'm going to create this space, a book, a variable, and it's going to have type book. So that means it's going to store a reference to a book object. Which book object? Well, right now it's nothing. There's no book object to be referenced, so the content of a book is just null, right? But we can add something to it. We can say a book is equal to a new book. So here we have now assigning the value stored in this variable is a new object reference, new book. So let's look at this. How do we know that all of this is happening? Well, oftentimes in class I step through code, and I do have a tutorial to show you how to step through code, but it's worthwhile to look at it now. If I double click here, I set a breakpoint. Unfortunately you can't see it. It looks a little bit like that. And I can do something called debugging. Now debugging is something that you're going to get used to in this class, and it allows us to see the contents of our program while we execute it. So here we have a book object. You'll notice that I've created it. A book is equal to new book. And so what does that look like? It looks like this. Here's the type of the object here, lab2.book because it's in the package lab2, and here's its location in memory, in heap memory. Well, you don't need to worry about that too much, but let's look at the contents of this object, shall we? We have right here, we have a view of all the variables that we're currently using in our program. We have args, which actually correspond to these things here, but more importantly we have a book, and it has an author name, number of pages, and title. And of course, these are set to the default values. We haven't said anything else about them. So author name is a type string, and the default value for that is null. It doesn't actually have a reference to a string. Number of pages is 0, and the title is again the null string, the null object reference. It's not a string, it's a null object reference. So let's fix that now. Let's say that we create a new book object, and now we want to change the content of our book object. So let's do that. So a book dot, let's say author name is me. A book, let's say title is equal to my book title, like that. And a book dot number of pages is 3. It's a very short book. Okay, so let's see what that does. So what I'm doing is I'm debugging by clicking here, and this allows me to step through my program line by line and view the contents of the memory as I execute my program. And again, if you check on my YouTube channel and if you look at the lecture notes for the first lecture in week 2, then I have a link to the full tutorial for code stepping. It's very useful, and I highly recommend that you look at that right now. But for now, what I'm going to do is step through, and we can actually see how the book changes, the book object changes as I assign string and integer values to the various object attributes or fields in the book. So have a look. What I'm doing is I'm pressing a button, but really what I'm doing is stepping through my code by clicking this button. So step over. So you'll notice here right away highlighted that the author name is now Ken Johnson, as expected. If you click down here, you get all sorts of additional information. You can see the contents of that string and how it's formed. You can step again. Here's the book title. You can actually change it if you want right here, but we don't want to change it. So that's from this assignment of the string book title to title. So that now stores an object reference to my book title string. And finally, number of pages is changed to 3. It's pretty easy. And we can continue. And while if you continue too far, you get some threading stuff. That's not important. So you can step through and see how your program changes line by line. Now, one of the things that we're going to be doing this week is working on constructors. So what a constructor does is gives you the ability to assign input values to construct your object. As you notice, we actually used 5 lines of code, and that's a lot. I think that we could actually write this in 1 line of code. That is to say, I would like to write something like this. A book is equal to new book. But really what I would like to do is provide some input to this book constructor. So the constructor is something we'll go over in class, and it basically allows you to set the initial values of the object attributes. So I could write something like this. Ken Johnson, my book title, and the number of pages. So compare this with all of this text that we've written. That would be much nicer to write. So how do we do that? Right now there's a big error there. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a specialized method called a constructor. And it has this form. We tend to write public book, which is the name of the class, and we have some input parameters right here. So let's add some input parameters. Remember how to do that. It's string, let's say, the author name, string, the title, int n pages for the number of books, number of pages in the book. So there it is. Now if you go back to the book application, we can then get rid of all this text, this code here, and just simply have that. So that would be great if then after we got this book object back, that all of the object attributes would be initialized to these values. So how do we do that? It's quite easy, and it's pretty standard format for all constructors. So we start off by referencing the current object. So we introduce a new keyword called this dot author name is equal to the input value author name. So this is referring to the current object, and we'll see this keyword in lectures on week 2. So if you don't understand it right away, that's okay. You'll have plenty of time to think about it and to practice it in the lab. This dot title is equal to title, and this dot end page is equal to end pages. So again, these are referring to the current object's attributes, and this is referring to the input value here. You'll notice that when I highlight this, this is also highlighted like that, right? It's referring to that, and that's referring to that. And this is referring to this string author name here for the current object. Okay, again, let's run it. So I actually am going to debug it so that I can see the content of my book object. Now I'm going to step into, so I want to see what happens whenever I call this constructor. So I step into the constructor. Whoops, a little bit too far. Right here. So here I am in the class book. I'm going to step through this. Now here's this, which is referring to the book that I'm operating on, the current book, and I'm initializing it. Oops, you can see it here that changed from the default value 3, like that. So I get a book object back, and it has all of these values initialized as we expected, just as before, but with a lot less code and a lot more clarity, I would say. And of course, if we try to print out a book to the console, we just get the class name and its reference in memory. Wouldn't it be nice if we could print out something like this, book.title, and maybe some other text that said a book.author name, and maybe number of pages is a book.number of pages. And if I just ran that, if I just run it like that, then I get, of course, the output of the object attributes, which is my book title, Ken Johnson, number of pages 3, like that. But you know, even that is a lot of text to write, because if I had many books, then I would have to cut and paste all of this. This is rather a messy sort of string to write. I have to concatenate a lot of attributes, and imagine that the attributes change at some point. Maybe later I'm going to actually include the some additional data, like maybe I also include string publisher. So what do I do then? Well, for this I could just simply add something to the end here, or I could just simply say that the publisher is the empty string, because I don't want to particularly worry about it whenever I'm initializing a book object. But what about this? Imagine if I was printing out books everywhere in my application. I had many books and I'm printing them all out. I would have to go to each one and maybe, I'd have to change this here and put publisher and then put a book dot publisher, and it makes it even more messy. So what I would like to actually do is just simply ask each book object to just print itself out. I would just like to write something like that rather than have this messy code everywhere throughout my application. How could we do that? How could we make it so that it prints out something nice like that whenever I do that, instead of printing out this? Well, as it turns out, Java has a nice trick and a special method, and it's called a toString method. And here's the format. This is the method signature. Now, what I want to do is return a string representation of this object. Now, how do we do that? It's quite easy. Well, we've got a nice representation here. It's very long, but if we just had one method to do this, it would be great. So imagine if we, instead of printing out something, but we returned this value. We returned a value that looked like this. So we print out the author name, maybe the publisher, number of pages, whoops, and the title here. And that seems to work, although we have a bit of a problem. What is a book? That doesn't make any sense, because we use this book object here in this application, but in the book class, really we don't have any idea of what a book is. So what we're missing actually is using the keyword this, right? That's what we're missing here. So if we put return this book title, this author name, and then maybe some publisher information, and then the number of pages, that would be much better. So this actually returns a string that represents the book object. So whenever I run this, it looks like this. So of course we don't have any publisher information. We could maybe extend our constructor so it does so, but for now we're not going to. So you'll notice how I've changed maybe a lot of text into some very simple lines of code. It's very simple, and all of this has to do with defining the behavior and the functionality in the book class. So this is some of the content of Lab 2. If you get a bit stuck, the TAs and myself are there to help, so please ask questions. Ask questions on the AUT Online discussion forum, and we'll see you in the lectures and labs. Have a great day. Bye.